They're constantly searching for a bargain.
I mean, it's going to get people in trouble unless people begin to have some cynicism and questioning of it.
Because you're going to need a new job if you're not able to start using these tools.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Kube here, Executive Conversations. And today I have the pleasure of having a very old friend. Mike and I have known each other over 40 years. We actually started off our careers in catering on BC ferries in the 80s, interestingly enough, where we were serving sunshine breakfast. So Mike would put the toast on and ham, and I would put the egg in the hollandaise sauce and then pass it to a passenger. This was before we understood what careers were. Mike ultimately ended up going over to Harvard. I ended up, going to Eastern Canada, but Mike was actually there before me in Ontario. So we both moved from British Columbia to Ontario. And then, I started doing a lot of international business, and Mike actually had an interesting story. Well, I'll let him begin to share that. But Mike, love having you here. And, the crux of, our relationship has been through a lot of change. You and I have seen dramatic changes in our careers and our paths. And you have, graduated from one of the best institutions in the world in law. And then you went on to have a pretty successful political career. And then you had some adversity that you dealt with, which I think has made you even more rounded. And, a couple of the topics that, given the adversity that you've seen in your life and, the world, I think has never seen a faster rate of change. And in our prior discussions, we were talking a bit about, how would we frame this discussion? And we're talking boards, corporations, be it profit, not for profit, and government entities have so many things that are about to come at them that are not clearly understood. So, I would love to hear from you. Like, one, let's share your story and where you've been, but more importantly, how did those hard things that you've been through in your life and the things that you've applied from a business perspective, how do you suggest we take those to help people learn on how they can begin to deal with this adversity? Because I think you've been through more than most. And, in your book, you talk about how that adversity has really helped shape you and given you some different insights, which I think are really valuable to share today.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for having me on, Dan. And I think that the BC Ferries, if they're listening, should be naming a ship after you. And as we speak right now, there's a BCGEU, which is the big government union out here in the province of British Columbia, that your father led a few weeks ago, a few decades ago. They're on strike. And so, not much has changed. You haven't missed anything. But yeah, a few things have gone on in my life and in your life too. When I got elected at a very young age, 33, and became an attorney general at a very young age at 37, and had a run of success. And along the way, got lucky. I did not realize how much I was really being. All my success was at the hands of others, and that I was sitting on a lot of shoulders of some incredibly talented people. We all might have moments of imposter theory, but someone's got to sit in that chair sometimes. When you're 37 years old, you're the attorney general, you think that's something you should be doing in maybe at least your 40s, if not your 50s or your 60s. For a lawyer, that's a dream job, to be able to run the justice system for the state, or for the province, or for country. And I was told by my chief of staff, someone's got to sit in that seat. Someone's got to do that job. And it's you, apparently, until further notice. And so I just went with that, and that worked. I had great talent, and I let the great talent bring on new great talent. And, that's really all. Whatever success I had over the years was 100% thanks to that. And sometimes getting out of the way when it was time for them to shine. I went through a run, was a minister of economic development, eventually left to head up a big economic development corporation in Toronto called Invest Toronto. And then poof, the future governor, premier, future politician with a great bright future, it just all completely changed in half a minute. And a terrible tragedy. A man died. I was charged with killing him. The whole thing took 28 seconds, and that's the name of the book. I know that the whole thing took place 28 seconds because my criminal defense lawyer figured it out that it was 28 seconds, and she was able to determine what was happening during every single part of every single second over 28 seconds. And that's one of my lessons, I think, in the midst of adversity is to recognize that your judgment, depending on the level of the adversity, if it's hitting you. So if you are found to be caught on camera during a Coldplay concert, for example, and kissing a member of your staff while your wife, future ex-wife, is at home, the first thing you need to recognize is that your judgment's about to be impaired. And so you don't need to run out and resign, but you do need to go get a team in place immediately, someone to deal with communications and the crisis. The best lawyer you can find, and you need to open up your wallet because some people don't like paying lawyers, or they're constantly searching for a bargain with lawyers. In a crisis, don't be searching for a bargain. You go get the best lawyer you can. And my advice is trust them enough that you can hand this very important mandate over to them. In my case, it was my liberty. Here, please protect my liberty and make sure that I'm not convicted and I don't go to jail. And then stand back and let them do their job. You need to know what they're doing, and they need to be reporting to you. Hopefully that we're not talking about that kind of a crisis that a company's facing in AI. And then in addition to getting those people around you, you need to feel like you've got the people who are important to you. You need to be confident that they've got your back. And if they don't, you need to talk to them to get them to have your back. Don't worry about what everybody's thinking. Don't worry about your reputation yet. There'll be time for that. If your reputation takes a hit today, it can be brought back tomorrow. What you can't bring back tomorrow, but you can't do that if you get convicted, or if the board kicks you, or the board fires you. You need to keep an eye on the number one goal. In my case, it was dealing with the criminal charge, and the charges were dropped 9 months later. And then the reset began. But the last thing I would say to folks, to executives especially, and to boards who are in the midst of something dramatic, I guess that's the best word for it, dramatic change, is there. I think there's a tendency to huddle and isolate. Don't isolate publicly. Yes, isolate. Don't wander in front of journalists and cameras and the public if you're in the midst of having to make a very big decision. But get your team around you, and don't be shy about involving as many people as possible in terms of getting their input. You need to give them a decision very quickly, but that doesn't mean immediately. But you need to do it quickly so that you can start to control the narrative instead of having it control you.
Yeah, I mean, you're involved in a lot of organizations that have a lot of boards in your not-for-profit. And one of my daughter's favorite terms, she calls people like you and I Q-tips because we have gray hair. And a lot of people in our demographic, don't have a lot of AI experience, and they're putting a lot of trust in AI. And unfortunately, AI is also it exudes trust in the way it actually presents information. However, like for example, Malika and I on our team were having a discussion yesterday, and we're saying, oh, how old is the CEO of Anthropic, or how old is, we had this bet that one of them is younger, and it turns out one of the guys was 33. And I just, for fun, I said, oh, well, how old is that in dog years? And the GPT came back very authoritatively saying, well, that's 1 dog year.
Yeah, great.
Right? Absolutely wrong. And it gave a formula that it hallucinated on, but it said it with such emphasis, clarity, and references, a clear hallucination that it's going to get people in trouble unless people begin to have some cynicism and questioning of it. And I think ultimately, it will get better. But I think the challenge is we're seeing potential train wrecks, or train wrecks have already happened and people just don't know about it. And there was like, for example, another case, where is it, on Australia, I think, where Deloitte was just sued for like $800,000 or what, because they actually used a whole bunch of research that was not authentic was actually hallucinated, and they didn't actually back check the citations in the report that they gave to the Australian government. So what is your advice for these boards who might not have that technical expertise, especially when these things are becoming so pervasive? I mean, because I mean, you're not a super techie, but I mean, you see these things. Like, what are your thoughts?
How dare you? So my advice to the boards is get it,
Yeah.
because if I can be using Python to code a something that's able to send me a blog every day about the things I'm interested in, if I can do that, you can do that. And the way I taught myself that is working with the AI tools. And so you can now do anything. And the challenge, of course, is, I think, fear. It's fear around the technology and fear around the data literacy. And I think it's similar to literacy. Folks who can't read well or can't read are not even aware how fearful they are about that fact. And so they avoid any circumstance where they might be seen to be illiterate. Well, I think the same's true for data literacy. I think that the data illiteracy that I've seen, certainly amongst our generation, and I'd say down to folks who are certainly in their 40s and their 30s too, is I think one of the great untold stories that we're about to find out about. Because I think that there's a lot more data illiteracy and tech illiteracy, is what I mean, than anybody realizes. I've been shocked to see how far behind government ministries, big ones, $1 billion government ministries, how far behind their staff is and how far behind their IT is. I think that it's something that every organization needs to come to terms with right away, not in a way that you're policing everybody and not in a way that you're shaming folks. If it's an aptitude problem versus an attitude problem, you might think it's an attitude problem and they don't want to change, but it might just be an aptitude problem and they're masking it with things like, oh, I'm a Luddite. I can't do that. Well, if you're a Luddite, then you should, I don't know, spruce up your resume using your hammer and chisel, because you're going to need a new job if you're not able to start using these tools.
And you in your past, you've used lots of sort of legal frameworks to look at challenges and problems from a board perspective. Which ones do you believe kind of have parallels to the way we should be looking at AI? Like, is it ESG? Is it DEI? How would you start?
Right. Firstly, let's just mention a couple good news. What's great for boards is all those reports that dominate board meetings. I think they should be gone. All of them should be gone, because we can get those reports every day. We should be able to build our companies in a way that that AI programming, whether it's local enterprise or whether it's one of the big ones, is feeding that information to board members all the time so that they know. And when they have questions about it, they can ask questions with their AI tools, which can be verified afterwards with the CFO and the CEO. But a lot of that ponderous reading of materials back to people, these materials should be producible in most companies instantly, every hour of every day. So that's the good news. So then boards can deal with real risks and boards can deal with real opportunities and their strategy during this time of change, because they don't have to do all the things that used to be board meetings 101. On the other end, I think that boards need to recognize that I think that boards are going to be unnecessarily risk averse and want to slow things down. And so if any board that does that, rather, I should say, they're just going to fall behind. And so there's got to be, people need to be literate enough and capable enough to use the AI tools such that they can be an AI board member and use their experience and judgment where it can be used to make decisions about risk, and mindful that a risk averse approach is going to have it may have its consequences. Although, as we watch Anthropic and OpenAI compete, and one of them, I think it's fair to say, is taking an approach that's a little less freewheeling. We'll see if that strategy pays off. If they decide that legitimacy is more important, and I think Anthropic takes that approach, but we just gave an example of them hallucinating. On the hallucination front, I should add that on the legal side, as you can imagine, a lot of lawyers have gotten in trouble before the courts producing factums that were written by ChatGPT and citing cases that don't exist, and it's actually led to some disciplining of some lawyers as a result. And it speaks to the issue of how we're going to verify the work that's being done. And it's also one of the reasons why, although I'd like to talk about it, if not now, then maybe another day, the impact of AI on the legal industry itself is, I think, unclear, as long as the legal industry, as it now stands, has something that no AI tool has, which is really built-in insurance,
Yeah,
right?
I
Like
actually
if
think based on
yeah.
some of our previous discussions, one of the things that got you excited is the whole concept of digital justice and also digital logistics, right?
Hmm.
Because the current system is broken. It's
Yeah,
inefficient.
yeah.
It's for the stakeholders and the people who pay for it, we're not getting good value for money. And you've bounced over the years ideas off of me that I believe now are really
Mm,
potentially enabled very easily.
hmm.
And maybe throw some of those ideas out, because some of the people hopefully will embrace these ideas and make the system better for all. But I mean, like
Hmm.
the wait
Hmm.
times, the backlog, the
Yeah,
cases being thrown out because we can't get to them. Like that's just
right.
not acceptable in this day and age.
No.
But it happens every day.
Yeah, no. There's because the um, digital infrastructure is non-existent in most justice systems in the United States and Canada, because it's still a paper-based system in many areas. Where it's not a paper-based system and they've now digitized, they're still working in systems that are siloed from each other, even within the same jurisdiction and department. So uh, Legal Aid BC had past tense 3 databases which covered their lawyers. But but you might find a lawyer on one database, but not on another database. And why? Well, you need to know the nature of how government works. It was just budgets. You'd get a budget to develop your database 1 year, this much, and then 10 years later you'd get a budget to develop it this much, and it would result in different projects. So the delays are astronomical, absurd. I think the changes that you'll see in the healthcare system, you'll see in the justice system as well. And you really should be able to as well. And this, we're obviously a bit away from this yet, but I think the consumer should be able to turn to either open source tools or low cost tools to find out what's going to happen under the law, whether it's criminal law or civil law, in a way that's reliable enough. And when they have that answer, they'll also be able to be told what they do next. That right now isn't being done, except interestingly around Reddit. So most family law advice that people obtain, uh, there is research to this effect, is from Reddit. They don't get it from a lawyer because they can't afford a lawyer. And so they get their advice from Reddit from someone who did it maybe themselves without a lawyer. So you can find out for the first time what the law is, and as a result of that, be able to conduct yourself accordingly. And I mean, that day is really it's here now. That day is here now. I wouldn't recommend that people make big decisions involving a legal issue impacting their lives uh, just based on something that ChatGPT told them, at least without working with ChatGPT to make sure that they're right.
For sure. And
And
like,
on the logistics side, we should be able to we should be able to shorten the times, I think, by 90%. So we could have criminal trials in the United States in a week. We can have civil litigation that right now takes 4 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years. We should be able to get all that done within a year. And I mean all the way through to the U.S. Supreme Court, all the way through to the UK House of Lords. Why? Well, because the appeal courts can, through AI, can start working on these cases now because of the capacity. They're just so supercharged that we can anticipate everything now and watch a case come up and go through almost in real time.
So I guess that also will correspond with potentially a ton of savings, right? And
Oh,
efficiency. So
yeah. For the first time in maybe, well, 5 centuries, for the first time in 5 centuries in Europe, and for the first time, certainly, um, since the beginning of Confederation in Canada and since the United States became a country, for the first time, people are going to have access to justice, as we call it. Access to justice is the jargon for getting reliable legal advice. And it used to be that the local magistrate would come around into your hood and you'd go and meet with them and you'd get basically a resolution. You might get whipped at the end of it or hand over some cows, but it's okay. At least you got access to justice. We haven't had that for a very long time.
So, like I know along your journey, you've had some really strong mentors, and then
Mhm.
you had some real big tragedy, and some people disappeared. Like you found out who your friends were pretty quick.
Yeah.
And who were your big mentors, and what did they teach you that still
Mm.
persists today? And like, how do you teach your kids these lessons?
Mm. Oh, well, yeah, no, I mean, the life lessons for my kids certainly have come from, other family members and, but
The more
the
sane
love
ones.
life, the love life lessons, no, we're not, the, mentors, well, Beverly McLaughlin was Chief Justice of Canada. She was and remains the most productive person I've ever met. She would crank out judgments at a level. She's the longest serving Chief Justice in the Western world. She was on the Supreme Court of Canada at the age of 49, and she had this real confidence in her abilities and the ability to make decisions in a way I've never seen. But I emulated that. I saw the value of it, and she made mistakes, and she always tried to uh, permit the lever that would allow her to change. So she might say, "Okay, we're going to write a judgment doing this," but she would leave open the ability until it was finalized, the judgment, to switch and change her mind. And that's, Supreme Court of Canada decisions, US Supreme Court decisions, when the decision's made, it's done and you've made the law. Some people find that intimidating. Even members of the Supreme Court of Canada, and I know members of the US Supreme Court, which, by the way, is so much more productive than our Canadian appellate courts. But the ability of there are judges out there who, believe it or not, have a hard time making a decision because they're overwhelmed by the implications. And I think those are just circumstances where they need to get over themselves and realize that, judges are allowed to make mistakes, that they might make a mistake, but it's more important to get timely justice out than it is to delay everything all the way through because you can't make a decision. But having said that, that's one mentor. I'll pick another, John Warden at Sullivan and Cromwell, which is a Wall Street firm in the United States. He taught me a lot of things. One of them, he made me rewrite a cover letter. It was just a cover letter with a document attached. Dear client, here's a document attached. That was basically it. He made me do 15 drafts of the cover letter. And when we do letters lawyer to lawyer, it might be 20 drafts. He'd say this is wrong and that's wrong. And so there are some basic skills that he forced me to get good at that was helpful. And he also taught me how I'm supposed to dress all the time. And that is as follows: overdress a little everywhere you go. This is not advice, Daniel, I think that you've taken, but it's advice that I have taken, which is why I'm wearing a blazer on your podcast on my deck.
Yes, very nice. I mean, but also, you early on when you had moved to Ontario, and I was actually running the homeless shelter, I think, and you were in government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Weird times, and you were so career focused. But you've transformed that a lot. Like you
Yeah.
now focus on yourself a lot more
Right. Yeah.
and care. Like who taught you that? Because you were not that guy.
Sure. No, I was not that guy. What happened was after the accident, I call it the accident because it was an accident from my perspective. But after it took place, I ended up frequenting. I was basically around the folks that you were working with in the homeless shelters, and I began to see myself in them and them in myself, and they accepted me in a way that they shouldn't have, because in my dramatic scandal, I was the rich attorney general who was involved in a deadly accident with a poor addict bike courier, and so it became a culture clash. And an international story in that was covered in the New York Times, and so they should have not liked me and had every reason not to, but they accepted me nevertheless. And the generosity from that community inspired me. The generosity of spirit changed me, I think, and I ended up changing and taking inspiration from those very generous folks who were unwell, who lived on and near the streets, mentally ill, addicts, both. Often on top of that, physical disability. It goes without saying they all had trauma in their lives, and yet they had moments of this enormous generosity, and this changed my perspective, and I started focusing on and eventually switched my career to turn the tables on myself. Having been somebody who clamored after power, now I wanted to help people and defend people who were facing power that was being misused. And that change in perspective and that change in career, where I'm now not a taker all the time, but I'm a giver as well, was a big part of it. And also, I should say, I've been in recovery for the last 20 years. And, and it's in the rooms of recovery that I picked up a set of principles that I try and practice in all my affairs. And those principles are based on the idea that if you want to be a person who's held in decent esteem, then you should engage in esteemable actions. And I've been very imperfectly trying to do that.
Yeah, you come along. Like, I remember, like, you were in some pretty dark places, and like it's so like you're back, like you're Mike again. Like it's for a
That's
while
fun.
there, you were
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's
Oh,
amazing.
yeah. Yeah.
And you went and then you left and headed legal aid in BC, and that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Did you enjoy that gig?
Yeah.
What
Oh,
did you
yeah.
take away from that?
Well, one of the things that I'm very interested in is helping organizations that think they have a strategy realize that if they could see what their strategy was, they would go and get a new strategy. I would say that every legal aid plan in most states, and certainly in the United States and in Canada and in the UK and across Europe, to the extent that they have a system like that, most of them, their strategy isn't a strategy. It's just spend the budget. That's their strategy. We need to spend the budget so that they don't cut our budget anymore. And that's not a strategy, obviously. And so, we developed a strategy where we were going to better the outcomes of our clients and try and create metrics that would measure that, so that we are aligning the economic incentives for the legal aid lawyers with what's in the best interest of the clients. And this was a radical concept, which I came to see as a leader. One, I needed to be patient in terms of getting people to embrace and understand that they may think that the mission of the organization is access to justice, but really the mission of the organization is spending its budget. And they needed a new strategy. And you will know there's many companies out there, and I've learned a lot from Roger Martin, who I got to work with when I was the Minister of Economic Development, and he was leading the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. I think Roger Martin has been named the #1 management consultant in the world. I don't know exactly who's in charge of that decision, but he's something else. And I find the way he explains strategy is profound and simple and great. And he's given many examples of countries that have taken advantage of that approach.
Yeah, very, very cool. So, Mike, you mentioned like strategy and playbooks. it'd be cool to get your take on like some of the playbooks that you use successfully in the boards that you sit on, and what are transferable assets that some of the listeners, because most of the people listening to this are execs in tech or board members in tech organizations.
Yeah. The boards that I've seen that work really well, they have a relationship with their executive management team that is symbiotic. And, I understand that's not always possible because of for reasons of shareholder, but certainly outside of the public company context, although also in the public company context, having that symbiosis is, I think, more important than the conduct of the board or the strategy of the board. Getting themselves aligned with the team so that they're not working against each other. I'd say that most not-for-profit boards and charitable boards, for example, there isn't a symbiosis between management and the board. Everybody on the board actually wants to be the CEO for a day of the organization. They don't want to do it as a job. They want to apply for it as a job, but they think they know how to do the job, which is something that you would want out of a board member. That's good, but they're not working with management to get them there. And so, I'd say that most management don't respect their boards in the not-for-profit world. And how do we get there? It's just leadership. It's just leadership. That's all. It's people around the board table, maybe not all of them, but certainly the chair, for goodness sakes, engages in a level of leadership that maps out the path and the planning to achieve the strategy and get the measurement. I mean, I think it's simple, and it's become even simpler with AI to get the answers to this and to do these measurements and to accept that sometimes maybe the measurement isn't going to be published through a peer-reviewed journal. Maybe it's not that reliable, the measurement, but it is better than nothing to start measuring. And we can always be checking our measurement so that we can find some rational basis upon which to measure our goals. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I mean, I think it's important, right? I mean, I think especially now, I mean, you have this, culture is so important right now, and emotional intelligence, I say, is probably more important than ever, because you have people who are the individual contributors, the managers on your teams are stressed because they don't know what AI means for their industry or check. Then you throw on tariffs and, globalization and all sorts of turmoil in the world. Like, I think people are being more stressed than ever, not really understanding the future. And I think, the challenge is boards are very, stakeholder or shareholder incented. Like, how are we maximizing stakeholder engagement? But without the people in a company, you have nothing, right? Unless you're full AI and you're a solo entrepreneur. But most companies are still made up of a whole bunch of contributors that add a ton of value. And I think that's one of the things that boards need to try to understand is, how do you keep the culture together, help people feel good about what they're doing, but also, unfortunately, people need to understand that they have to do a talent assessment, because not everyone is going to make it through this next sort of phase in AI. And so, and if you don't, so that's up to your earlier point, like, everyone needs to embrace it. Like the fact that you're, vibe coding and using Python is a perfect testament that anyone can do it. Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's some skill sets that people will say, oh, that's for next lifetime. By the way, I think when I knew you used that word modesty or humility, and that was, and I think I would say, oh, no, that's for the next lifetime. Modesty and humility is not anything I'm interested in. That was my mindset. Who cares? I don't need those I don't need that level of emotional intelligence. But there's some skill sets that we can't, you can't afford to continue to operate in certain sectors anyways, without embracing them and accepting that you just need the training and in fact that the training is out there. But I'd say a couple other things. I saw some charities and not-for-profits and some companies, and this was in the years that I was at Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and which is part of basically is a partner of the ACLU. We're not a chapter of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, but we're together with 12 other civil liberties organizations. And I watched as some of these organizations turn themselves into equity, diversity, and inclusion organizations. They kind of became captive of the moment and took their eye off what the whole purpose of the organization was. This I saw happening in other organizations, and certainly this happened across governments as well, where their strategies became about DEI. Well, with the election of Donald Trump, DEI is quite unfashionable globally now, and so that's less so the case. But I wonder to what extent the same error might happen with respect to AI. So, in other words, companies start becoming AI companies when they're not AI companies. They just need to use AI as the tool to achieve their goals, which is determined by their strategy. So I think it's more important than ever that they understand what a strategy is, which is, I think Roger Martin defines it as, although I got a question for you, I think he defines it as how do we win? That's the strategy. How do we win? How do you define strategy?
Well, one of my favorite quotes from one of my mentors when I used to work in Malaysia was Mr. Koo, and his definition is, you know what a long-term strategy is? You know the answer? Short-term one that doesn't work. So, but more importantly, from an AI perspective, our strategy is pretty simple. We have such a backlog and so much stuff we want to do. Our goal is trying to figure out how do we enhance and extend our employees by leveraging tools, not rip and replace, right? It's it's our because we already have a plan on what we're trying to do and leverage an AI to enhance our organization. And I mean, a lot of people are saying, oh, it's going to get rid of all these things. There's so many things that we need to do, and you still need that intelligent guidance and steering that humans provide, especially because people aren't questioning AI. Like AI governance, like it doesn't even exist. Right. And the AI standards bodies don't really exist because everyone has all these new competing platforms. You know, the one thing that scares me from a strategic perspective, I think AI is an absolute change agent across all industries, and it can have a huge quantum impact to, lower the costs so governments can be way more efficient, so we can reduce our tax bases and all this sort of stuff. But by the same token, there's so many unknowns that we need to understand. So we need some leadership from the highest levels.
Yes.
And I don't know what the answer is, but it's not every province and every municipality having a rule on AI. It has to be some high level legislation that says, hey, we just need to make sure we're keeping an eye on this. And also the realization is we already have laws that exist. We don't have to create a whole bunch of new laws to duplicate laws that already exist if something goes wrong. And I think we're seeing a lot of overreaction. Like in the US, you're seeing it at the state and municipal level. I mean, and even though I have some disagreements with Sachs, I think some of the stuff he's doing at the White House is pretty cool. I think he has some really great vision for, because for us to keep up and compete, we need to make sure we're not staggering enterprise with all this burden. So
yeah, I was thinking about some other changers, and I know maybe AI is bigger than the advent of electricity, but when electricity came along, it was by the courts seen as a mysterious force. That's a quote from a decision, and people were afraid of it, and it took 50 years to regulate it. 50 years. And at a certain point, after about 10 years, they settled the regulators settled on strict liability, such that if there were some things that if you did it with electricity, you were strictly liable. I think we need to lean on principles, as you say. You said it very well. We need to lean on principles that we're familiar with and apply them to the AI context. And so, what do we not want to have happen? Well, we don't want malice, we don't want reckless behavior, and we don't want negligent behavior. And the way for companies to determine that, and they're doing that now, is to create a level of traceability and ensure through their self-regulation that they're constantly adapting through that. But that's going to end up being what the regulation looks like. It's going to be some version of what's reckless. And that means at some point, we're going to need to unpack the black box and determine, because right now it's easy for executives to say it's a black box. We can't figure out what's going on in that black box. I wonder if that's overstated, and over time, it may be that just as with electricity, we couldn't explain how it worked. We're going to have to unpack the black box eventually to create some level of traceability that will allow us to determine liability. And I think that's going to be where we end up. But I think we're years away from having effective regulation. And in the meantime, as you say, we're going to have some intermittent, stupid regulations. that are frankly probably wrapped up in the concerns that people have in general with kids and phones, right?
Mhm.
And so it ends up being mixed together in a way that is going to create, well, it's going to stifle the industry in some areas and make those jurisdictions uncompetitive, and they're going to get crushed. So it's politically a terrible idea. I think you can talk about leadership and AI and big changes and regulation in a way that doesn't involve making it worse. And I just, we can't get that genie back in that bottle. So just don't even try.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I also think it needs to be like coordinated policy, like a North American policy, or just because
Yeah.
we can't have different sets
Yeah.
of rules in Canada and the
No,
US, and it
no.
just like
And
because
Europe, and yeah.
yeah.
Well, because Asia, I mean, Asia's ahead of us on this front. Do you think that's fair?
I mean, I think on the open source front for sure, and
Yeah.
I mean they're very focused and they have some great policies, and they're not putting any restrictions on their approaches, right?
Right.
Which is crazy.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's for us to do that would be impeding our progress. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's something that we need some really smart people who understand AI, not
Hmm.
legislatures
Hmm.
or
Right.
legislators who have no
Yeah.
clue about it, right?
Yeah.
It just because then they
Right. And
overcorrect.
yeah.
So
And the populist instinct comes up, and the populist instinct is to appeal to people's fears. I know, because that's what I used to do. I did it for a living. I was a professional fearmongerer, and I banned pit bulls. And that worked. We were very popular when I banned pit bulls. But the point is if you appeal to people's fears, that's not leadership.
yeah.
That's not leadership. But you might think that that's going to get you reelected. I'm not sure that that's a good long-term or short-term political strategy.
Yeah, because I just see all the good where, just AI in medicine. We have
Oh,
shortages of doctors throughout North America. We don't have enough. We have more need. And, for us to slow that down and impede that progress and innovation, it's just
mm-hmm,
the wrong
mm-hmm.
move. Like, absolutely needs to be done safely. But we have rules that already say if you're doing bad things, we can sue you.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to create
Yes,
new legislation for malice.
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly
So,
right. Yeah, AI in health, AI in education, AI
yeah.
in law. I mean, in all these cases, these are the opportunities for society. And, education. I mean, we could spend an episode talking about that. Law. I have spent a bit of time talking about that. That's just three functions. How it's going to affect employment. I'm sure you agree. AI is actually going to end up. I don't know when, but at some point it's going to lower unemployment rates, because we're going to be able to tackle the causes and consequences of unemployment through AI in by way of diagnosis and prescriptions that we currently don't have and we're constantly guessing at.
Yeah, but I mean, even if some of the people view as, pretty right wing, like Musk, he thinks about a universal income, like in the future at some point, or you can choose to work,
Yes,
you won't have to. I mean,
right.
getting to that point, there will absolutely be friction, but a lot of the thought leaders in the space are already understanding that positive impact and how there will
Hmm.
have to be adjustments. I don't know how
Yes,
that's going to unfold, but you have the richest man in the world already saying, "Hey, that's probably what's going to happen." I mean, that
right.
that makes me
Yeah,
feel much better than him saying, "No, the rich are just going to get richer and there's going to be
right.
massive turmoil and civil war." I mean,
Hmm.
it's just
Right.
like you, I see the positives of this thing, but it has to be managed appropriately, right? And well, Mike, I know you wrote the book, and maybe share some of just your quick lessons that you've learned, the hardest lessons that you've learned, and how you apply those in closing. Because I mean, I've always been a big fan, but I have a bias because you've been my friend forever. So it's
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I look, the things I learned the most are really positive lessons of what I'd call grace, of people who came to my defense, but also people who wanted to help and wanted to assist me and reached out. In some cases, a lady was driving by. She saw me walking down the road. She heard that I wasn't allowed to drive under my terms of bail, and she just picked me up and said, "Where are you going? I want to drive you somewhere." The kids in the back seat said, "Daddy, Daddy." That's not daddy. So, so she was going to eventually have to explain herself to her husband. But the point is that there are all these acts, generosity, kindness, actually an ability to tolerate me and what I might have stood for them, that, well, it changed me. I mean, it left me transfigured by that generosity. Also, understanding that in an era of social media, there's a big difference between who you are and what you stand for. And so if you were on a pedestal, as I was, and you get knocked down to the pillory, that, I never was the person on the pedestal, and I'm not the person on the pillory. And what matters is the people who are close to me and what they think of me. And I had to accept the idea that what other people think of me is none of my business, and that all I can do is, act my way into esteem through esteemable acts, as I said, as opposed to fretting my way into isolation and depression. And I also say that these dramatic experiences, if one keeps an open mind, can, I think, open our eyes up to new possibilities and new perspectives. I didn't have a concern about the presumption of innocence when I was the Attorney General. I didn't have a real concern around the rights to liberty. Suddenly I did, because I was on the other end of it. And there's nothing like being in a jail cell to awaken you to the impact of the state on an individual when they're detained and they're having their liberty suspended. So these are incredible lessons to learn, and give one a perspective that allowed me to connect with a group of people, criminal legal defendants, in a way that I never would have. So to put it in a business context, I think that these dramatic events may be able to allow us to have insights into our customers and into our businesses and into the challenges that they face. And, if you read military history, say John Keegan, A History of Warfare, you'll see how much the soldiers and even some of the generals were terrified almost all the time. And that, until you are on the until you feel that fear, you're going to disdain it. But once you come to recognize it, you felt it yourself, suddenly you have a level of compassion and a level of understanding, of knowledge, that allows you to move through the world and lead an organization in a way that you couldn't before.
Thank you very much. When I look forward to hanging out next time you're in town, or vice versa when I get out there. And yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we should consider doing a part 2, because there's a bunch of topics that'd be kind of cool to go deeper into.
That'd be great.
So,
and if your editor can, at the end of one of your questions, could you insert the following? That is the best question I think I've ever heard in my life.
Okay. I will do that.
Could we do that? Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
I'll do that for sure. Awesome, my friend. Thanks, man.
Okay.
Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
By the way, that was the best question I've ever heard in my life.